Hello, Zero Books readers. It's me again, Douglas Lane. And in this video, I'll be wearing a hat and I'll be responding to an hysterical rant from Alex Jones's acolyte, Paul Joseph Watson, while explaining the dual nature of modern art. You might notice that in this video, my image does not match up with the sound. This is done for two reasons. One, it's done in an attempt to create a discontinuity and a sense of alienation in the viewer. And of course, it's also done in order to bullshit my way towards artiness and meaning.
Modern art, or conceptual art, isn't art at all. It's one big circle jerk of pretentious twats trying to make themselves look sophisticated by ascribing meaning to something that's completely meaningless. The art world presents us with 90 tin cans filled with feces and demands that we treat it with reverence. Well, I'm not going to treat it with reverence. I'm going to objectively argue that it's 90 pieces of shit and it's not art. When you see someone intently staring at a Jackson Pollock-style vomit canvas, they're not really trying to ascertain its deeper meaning. It's all just an act to prove to the other pompous wankers that they're part of the same cult of aesthetic relativism, while sneering at the Philistine general public who just don't get it, despite the fact that there's nothing to get.
Here's a test I give my graduate students, all talented and well-educated. Please analyze this Jackson Pollock painting and explain why it is good. It is only after they give very eloquent answers that I inform them that the painting is actually a close-up of my studio apron.
I happen to own Tony Godfrey's 1998 Phaidon Press art book entitled Conceptual Art. The book starts with the early 20th century with Duchamp and Dada and covers avant-garde art through to Daniel Buren's 1997 piece Works in Situ. The book champions the kinds of works Paul Joseph Watson describes as shit. It includes some excellent black and white and colored reproductions, while justifying and explaining these works. Godfrey wrote, "Conceptual art is not about forms or materials, but about ideas and meanings. Conceptual art challenges the traditional status of the art object as unique, collectible, or saleable." According to Godfrey, conceptual art can trace its influence back to Duchamp's ready-mades, while its relationship to abstract expressionism, for instance, Rothko's triptychs or Jackson Pollock's splatter paintings, is complicated at best. Abstract expressionism breaks with previous forms of painting. It rejects linear perspective and representational standards. But by emphasizing the sensuous and spontaneous, it maintains what Duchamp would call a retinal approach to art. Abstract expressionism is an art that aims at stimulating the senses rather than inspiring thought. Conceptual art can be beautiful or ugly. It can be representative and perspectival, or flat and abstract. To judge whether a work is conceptual or retinal isn't easy. Paradoxically, the determination can't be made through the use of one's eyes alone, but rather requires the viewer to develop a concept, an interpretation, and to think through a judgment. If you rely on your vision alone to determine whether or not a work is conceptual, you're likely to misunderstand what you're looking at.
Modern art snobs explain to us the genius of someone like Matisse by claiming that the invention of photography made it necessary for artists to be more imaginative and less realist. Bullshit. Ron Mueck produces the most hyper-realist works that the art world has ever seen. Yet it's Matisse who is embraced by the art establishment, while to a large extent, Mueck is shunned.
Paul Joseph Watson misunderstands the art of Ron Mueck, who, while not quite adhering faithfully to the aims of hyperrealism, has more in common with Joseph Kosuth, who is known as the pioneer of conceptual art, than a Renaissance painter like Michelangelo or a realist like Gustave Courbet. After all, hyper-realist artworks typically aim to create the same epistemic and ontological uncertainty that Kosuth plays with in works like 5 Words in Orange Neon.
You see, before 1850, 1860, painting was more or less an anecdotal thing. You just had a little story that you painted on the canvas. But after that, the Impressionists, the Fauve, the Cubists always had on in their mind, not to tell a story, but to give your retina something to consider and appreciate as art. So that was what I call retinal art, because it concerns only what the retina receives. The colors and the forms, without much of an anecdote. Well, I didn't like it. I never liked it.
Of course, the reason Paul Joseph Watson's YouTube video denouncing conceptual art has over 1 million views isn't because Watson gets so much wrong, but rather it has so many views because Watson is saying something that is, in a fundamental way, simply true. Contemporary art is often just shit, cynical kitsch that demonstrates the artist's marketing savvy and connections more than any vision. A work like Jeff Koons' Basketball in a Fish Tank, which fetched over $17 million at the Bound to Fail auction at Christie's back in 2016, demonstrated nothing conceptually except for the dominance of finance over the art world. Last week, we released a video from Joanna Dimmers, who is a member of the Zero Books editorial team and the chair of musicology at the Thornton School of Music. In the video, Dimmers asked what kind of music might be considered revolutionary, or what the soundtrack for the revolution might be. We received a number of comments expressing skepticism about this question. A few accused Dimmers of being a navel-gazer. Others suggested that her question was somehow the result of her being an academic. But I think her question demonstrated her relationship to both conceptual art and to the failure of conceptual art. One way to understand the failure of contemporary art is to consider what happened to what I'll call conceptual art as it appeared in music. Atonality, minimalism, indeterminacy in music, ambient music, pure intonation, they could all be thrown on a similar heap to the one Paul Joseph Watson creates in his video. What's clear is that these various forms of music have in no way become independent from the commodity form, nor from the institutions of power that control and direct the art world. The audiences these various forms of music or art garner for themselves are either fragmented or dilettante. The various kinds of music produced around what passes for the avant-garde today create fragmentation in listeners just as much as they represent the fragmentation of not just music, but culture itself.
Und rasend wild, das Herz erfüllt von mörderischer Freude, durchwühlt dann, soweit kann, des Opfers Eingeweide.
This is why the book we published, entitled Colloquium on Sound, Art, and Music, is about something more than a mere academic debate, and has implications for people who might not immediately relate to a work like this one. Or to a work like this one. The debate in sound and art is about whether it's possible or even wise to rescue sound art from conceptual art. The book begins by explaining that sound art, as it is known now, has found a home through the legacy of Fluxus within the context of visual art. Fluxus was the 60s art movement that included people like Yoko Ono, John Cage, and Henry Flint. It was also the movement that included the bowel movements of Piero Manzoni. Those tin cans of artist's shit that featured in Paul Joseph Watson's video are a product of Fluxus, and they're currently in the Tate. The Tate describes these tins of shit this way: the artist's shit, dried naturally and canned with no added preservatives, was a perfect metaphor for the bodied and disembodied nature of artistic labor. Surely the Tate is having us on. Given the destiny of Fluxus, it's no wonder that those who are serious about sound art as a political art want to find a way back to music. The question for conceptual artists of all sorts, then, is how to get there. How do sound artists break free of the shit show that the visual arts have become and find their way back to the opera hall? How does the art of sound gain entry to the ruins of modernity? How does a new form of listening take hold of whatever institutions of bourgeois high culture remain in order to transform music, art, and society? In his 2014 book, Ghosts of My Life, Mark Fisher described the music produced by Ghostbox Records as a kind of conceptual art, only he never used those words. The sounds and images associated with Ghostbox Records are bizarro versions of BBC science fiction and 70s children's programming. And yet, despite or because of this nostalgic quality, Fisher felt that the music was progressive. It was a return to the radiophonic workshop via computing, a reimagining of the recent past, and a music that takes seriously the strangeness of the visions that came from our television sets. Fisher wrote, Ghostbox presides over a slightly alternative world in which the members of the radiophonic workshop were more important than the Beatles. In a sense, that is our world, because the workshop rendered even the most experimental rock obsolete even before it had happened. But of course, you're not comparing like with like here. The Beatles occupied front stage in the pop spectacle, whereas the radiophonic workshop insinuated their jingles, idents, themes, and special effects into the weft of everyday life. Perhaps Ghostbox Records has accomplished what sound artists will strive for, namely to move audiences into listening so that imagining a different totality, a different history, if only slightly different, becomes possible.